Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isabella Faraz, and I'm with the Department of Energy's ADR office. I want to mention the different groups that are involved with our event today. So we have the Federal Interagency ADR Working Group, Alternative Dispute Resolution Working Group, that sponsors this event along with DOE, specifically the Workplace Conflict Management section, of which Cindy Mazer is the chair. She wasn't able to be with us here today. And it's a team of DOE and FEMA folks who work very diligently to put these presentations on together. So I want to thank them and welcome all of you on the phone, via WebEx, and that are here with us today to the presentation. Before we get started on today's event, I want to mention our next ADR Lunchtime series, which will be on Wednesday, March 28th, at same time, noon. And the title is For Busy Feds, Boost Your Feedback Skills and See Powerful Results. Our guest speakers will be Tracy Kearney from Core Vision and Megan Johnston, who's the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Mediation Service. So back to today, we're very fortunate to have a team of two wonderful presenters, Milena Spitzer and Salima Villani. Milena is the founder and CEO of Inner Peace Building. She's a coaching and training institute supporting leaders and organizations in increasing their impact, success, and sustainability. She specializes in conflict transformation and has facilitated dialogues between leaders, governments, companies, and indigenous populations from Iraq, Northern Ireland, Cyprus, the Amazon region, Brazil, and Cuba. Milena spent 8 years in the field working as a peace builder, human rights advocate, and reporter for the BBC and NPR in conflict and post-conflict regions of South America, Southern Africa, and the Mediterranean. While in South America, she completed her master's in peace, conflict, and security in Argentina as a Rotary World Peace Fellow. After her fellowship, she co-founded the Rotary Peace Fellow Resilience Working Group to support peace builders across the globe in building resilient and sustainable careers. She's a certified facilitator and coach and a frequent speaker and facilitator for humanitarian and development organizations, including the World Bank and FEMA. In addition to her leadership at Inner Peace Building, she's the founding director of Dance Adventures, a tour company building community through dance worldwide. Recently, her company was selected to participate in Creative Startups, the world's foremost accelerator for creative companies. Milena is fluent in 3 languages and has spent most of her professional career between Brazil, Ecuador, Argentina, Colombia, Cyprus, and the US. We also have with us today Salima Villani. Salima is the co-founder and COO of Innovazing, which provides leadership development training and business strategy consulting to companies of all sizes. Aside from launching 5 fast-growing ventures across 4 different countries, she's also worked as an intrapreneur for over 12 years with nonprofits and multilateral organizations such as the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and as well with high-growth companies such as Upwork. Earlier in her career, Salima launched a nonprofit language school in Brazil, which is now the #1 Portuguese school in Rio, and its innovative business model has been replicated throughout Latin America. She later co-founded a translation agency and e-commerce business, which were acquired in 2012, and she co-founded a digital marketing agency with partners such as Google and HubSpot. Salima is passionate about empowering the developing world through technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. She currently teaches entrepreneurship at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies, where she received her master's degree in international economics and international relations. Salima also co-leads the World Bank Group's largest and most inclusive mentorship program. She spent most of her professional life between Brazil, Canada, Dominican Republic, Italy, and the USA. If you all join me in welcoming Milena and Salima to the stage today. Thank you so much.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here online, in person. We are so glad to be joining you to talk about high impact leadership today. This is something that Salim and I, really love, feel very passionately about, and have been working very deeply in together and in our own organizations. So a quick note about why we're here and what this is all for, right? For me, high impact leadership is quintessential for peace building, right? And what I've noticed is over the years working in different dialogues with different countries, different leaders, a lot of times those dialogues and those peace processes fall apart, right? We've seen this happen time and again. And what I have seen and observed over this time is really that these dialogues are falling apart because there's a breakdown in relationship between leaders and between the individuals involved, and a breakdown in trust. And what I discovered through my work is that actually there's also a breakdown in trusting ourselves as leaders. There's internal conflict just like there's external conflict. And so sometimes it's really hard to be with some quality or some aspect of our enemy when we haven't done the inside work to be with that quality in ourselves. And so this journey into high impact leadership, I hope that it provides really a window into who you truly are as a leader today, and how you can, really do the inside work in order to show up more powerfully in your dialogues, in your leadership, on your teams. This is something that I'm passionate about, and I'm excited to share it with you and see what we can discover together. So with that, I'll leave it to Salima to share a little bit more about why she's here today.
Yes, thanks, Milena. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, both here in person and virtually. Today we're here to bring you a toolkit of innovative tools that are focused on human-centered design. So really some new approaches to looking at conflict transformation, leadership, how you can lead differently, leading from the inside, as Milena mentioned. And one thing that's really important is for today's workshop, we really need you to have your workbooks, which you can download. The website is www.innovazing.com/leadership-toolkit. And you can download the workbook there. If you're able to print it out, that's great. If you're not, you can just follow along and just have a page and a piece of paper and a pen and take some notes, as we're going to be running through some exercises today. And our first exercise, Milena is going to introduce to you.
Yes, so a little bit about the agenda for today, and then we'll jump right in. We have a lot of content to cover, so just wanted to share with you, exactly what we're going to be going over. We're talking about high impact leadership today, so we'll spend just a few minutes taking a look at that and thinking about how that applies in our own leadership. And then we'll be going through 4 tools that we've created. We're practitioners just like you, and so we're not the end-all experts in this topic. In fact, we have a lot to learn. But what we have found is that these tools that we've developed help us in our practices. We hope they'll help you in yours. It's a tool belt. So you get to pick and choose what works for you, what works for your team, what works for your clients. So please, feel free to use these tools, share them amongst your teams and amongst your clients, and really see what is applicable for you. Not every tool is going to fit every project. So with that said, I just want to speak a little bit about high impact leadership. So high impact leadership, does anyone in the room want to share what their concept of high impact leadership is? Shy today? Okay. We'll give you a hint, right? High impact leadership is composed of a lot of different things, right? The way that we make our impact as leaders is not just one facet. So we've identified 7 different facets that we think are really quintessential to be a high impact leader. Those include team engagement, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, authenticity, responsibility, relationships and trust, reach and influence, goals and feedback, right? So I'm just curious to get a sense here. I know that all of us online and in the room today are leaders in some capacity, and as leaders we face a lot of challenges, right? So I'm curious if there's one of these categories right now, if anyone in the room would be willing to share, that they're facing a challenge in currently in their work, or maybe perhaps faced a challenge in the past. Anyone facing challenges around team engagement perhaps, or relationships? Love to hear from someone.
I'll share one. So Our office works with a roster of mediators that are administrative judges as their primary role. And so we're always finding ways to stay engaged with them, as since they don't get to engage in mediation as often as the full-time ADR staff. Despite all the training and experience they have, we want to keep ADR on their radar to keep them engaged with that when they don't have an active case.
Fantastic. Yeah, and go ahead.
So I think one of the challenges that I've noticed are goals and feedback. We're in such a high, I guess, octane environment that we tend to keep going and going and going. But one thing I have to do a better job at is getting the feedback from my direct reports and being able to make sure that from a leadership standpoint, I'm clearly defining goals so that they kind of understand and I continue to retain their buy-in. So it's one thing I hope to gain from today.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes we're moving so fast, right, and trying to achieve what we want to see that we don't take the time to incorporate feedback. And sometimes it's hard to keep the morale and engagement up on our teams when maybe we're not having the impact or having the direct contact that we want to have with the populations we want to serve. So thank you both for those. You know, today we're going to go through a teamwork test tool that we hope will be supportive for your teams to take a look at the different areas of teamwork and where we may or may not be strong, and going ahead and actually taking a look at how to strengthen those areas. And in terms of goals, I'm excited that we're going to be taking a look later at something that we've developed called the Epic Impact Plan, which really helps you in a visual way outline your goals and then go ahead and take a look at evaluation and feedback and how to keep incorporating that in kind of a dynamic and living way so that we don't just set a goal and then either forget about it or meet it and not evaluate and move on. So I hope that those tools in your tool belt will, you know, support you, and I know that there are lots of other, you know, those who are tuning in by web, I can imagine in all of these areas, we have areas where we're strong, we have areas where we're growing. So we hope that you enjoy this kit today. The way it's going to go is we're going to just focus very briefly on the first two tools, kind of give you a sense of how you might use them, but not actually go into depth. The previous slide, and then so we'll go really quickly through core leadership, quality integration, and influence mapping. And then from there, we are going to do something a little more experiential with the teamwork. So if you have a chance to go ahead and download that workbook if you're tuning in, we'll have you actually go through the exercise for that and the Epic Impact Plan. So thanks.
Yeah, and we'll take all your questions at the end. So just jot them down and we'll address them in the last 15 minutes. And so yeah, we're going to get started. We're actually going to have Melinda introduce the first exercise on core leadership quality integration. And just as we mentioned earlier, all of these tools and exercises address all of those different components of high impact leadership, and you'll see that throughout the workshop.
Thanks, Salima. So again, there is the link to download if you haven't already. It is innovazing.com/leadership toolkit, and we'll go ahead and get started with our first section. So the first thing we're going to is core quality integration, right? So what is this about? This is about really distinguishing and leveraging what makes you, not anyone else, but you, a unique and powerful leader. So, you know, we read a lot about leadership in the literature, and that we need to do this style of leadership or that style of leadership, but what we're really interested in is what's actually on the inside of who you are and how can you leverage that to make the impact that you want to make. So you'll notice in the workbook on page 1, there's a chance for you to take some time and explore your core leadership qualities. These are prompts and questions about the qualities that you bring into the room, about your life values, what your friends and colleagues love about you, what you're acknowledged for or what you'd like to be acknowledged for that maybe you haven't been, what you want to be remembered for. So this is just a chance for you to take some time on your own, and you can share these tools with your clients as well to really get them thinking about what are their core leadership qualities. On page 2, you'll notice that there's an opportunity to distinguish a little bit more in a defined way what those core leadership qualities are. So you'll see a page with quadrants on it, with different characteristics written in these quadrants. Now the way you would use this tool is to go ahead and star or circle the top, star all the qualities that resonate with you, and then you would go ahead and circle your top 5. So this will be important, and each category has different options that we'll see how they're implemented on page 3. The next is on page 3 is an opportunity to map those qualities, right? So we've developed some archetypes: the mentor, the educator, the coach, the innovator. And you'll notice that the qualities on this map in each of those categories actually correspond to the previous page with the quadrants. So what you would do is actually take the ones that you've circled and starred and find them here on this map. Now, what we know is that none of us are just one kind of leader, right? We're dynamic individuals. And so the idea is not for you to pigeonhole yourself into one archetype, but rather to see, where do you fall? Where are your strengths? And also to be thinking as well for later for integration about where perhaps you're not strong and you could bring people in who have those complementary leadership qualities. So you'll notice that, for example, for me, I fall in several categories. I identify as an educator, and I also identify as the coach, and I'm striving to be the mentor. So I map in several different areas. Doesn't mean I'm not innovative, right? But I tend to go into those realms. So you'll have an opportunity on your own to take a look at this tool and think about where you fall. On page 4, we talk a little bit about the theory behind this. So you may be familiar with transformational leadership theory. And if you're not, there's a citation there at the bottom for you to go ahead and read a little bit more about it if it's something that interests you. When we were developing these archetypes, we spent some time taking a look at the different types of transformational leadership out there, and really looked to design this tool, informed by that wisdom. But there are so many different ways of looking at leadership. So you may have seen lots of Venn diagrams before, outlining this. This is just one additional tool to have in your toolbox that your clients or that you may identify with. If someone says, I really identify with this innovator role, right? That may actually be something they can access when they're up in front of a room or when they're working with their team. So we try to put it into kind of a more, a more accessible language and knowledge. But this will explain a little bit about the different categories as per the literature. So that's page 5. And finally, there's an opportunity on that's page 4, the previous one on transformational leadership. Page 5 is about integration. So sometimes we'll use a tool like this and we'll just go home and be like, yeah, that was nice, right? And go on with our lives. How can we actually integrate what we discover about ourselves through this process into our daily practice? So these are some questions to get you thinking about it, and to get your teams and your clients really thinking about where they can make shifts. For example, what are the opportunities to show up more powerfully from these qualities in the workplace with my clients during conflicts, right? Because a lot of us are working in the conflict arena. How can we bring these leadership qualities to our alternative dispute resolution practices? And how can we show up differently? Because what we know is that we can, go out there and say the same thing, but if our being isn't there, if the way that we're showing up isn't powerful, we may not get our message across. People may not hear us, right? So it's really important to kind of get to know yourself and do that inside work. And this is really having you think about how to integrate it. Finally, who in my network or team has these complementary core qualities? So if I'm strong in one area, who can I partner with? Who can I work with that's going to help me, kind of round out my leadership? And finally, if I were living from those core qualities, what would shift in other areas in my life? What would shift with my family? What would shift with my friends? What would shift in my relationship to myself? There's also an opportunity to actually put down some actions and make some commitments around these qualities. So what's the quality that I want to be accessing more? What are some practices and actions that I can take on in order to really be living from that place? And by when will I take on those actions? As we know, many of you here are coaches, and we know that adding a by when can be really, really effective in order to get the fire started and actually be accountable to what we say we're going to do. So that's a very brief overview of that particular tool. Just wanted to share it with you, and we're going to move on to influence mapping. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Milena. Who here is familiar with the concept or the activity, the exercise of doing influence mapping? Anybody in the room? Would you like to share?
Full disclosure, I'm introduction leader to the Landmark Forum, and I've been trained by Landmark as well as Martin Heidegger stuff, phenomenology, ontology, training theology as well. Influence mapping I've done in that context. So you identify the different communities in which you operate, and you identify it by writing it out. And then you're able to see how you're occurring to each people in each community. And being inside of their listening of you and understanding of who you are, you acquire the power in those communities where you can understand, you're able to hear, for them to hear you and to being your, so I recognize the methodology and transformational leadership and the importance of the influence mapping as a visual aid in our journey from being to becoming.
Thank you so much. That's a great explanation. So that's exactly it. Influence mapping is really about mapping out your relationships, whether it's in your communities and your organizations, especially for our goal is to produce more impact or affect change, whether it's with our teams or organizations. It's really about looking at our different relationships strategically, but it's also a really simple exercise because oftentimes it's just really mapping it out. We have an example right here actually. So this is what it looks like. You see it in your workbook as well on page 5. But it's really just taking a sheet of paper and drawing out the different relationships around you and placing arrows between you and those relationships. And the thickness of that arrow, it really symbolizes the amount of influence. So for example, we have Jane Doe in the middle, and then we have, for example, Kenny is the boss, and so Jane Doe has some influence on her boss, but Kenny has more influence. The boss has more influence on Jane Doe. So it's really trying to understand, for example, if Jane Doe is trying to make a change, or she's looking to produce more impact in whatever project she's working on. Maybe it's a better strategy for her to look at head of logistics or human resources where she has more influence. So when you map this out, it's actually it's interesting when you look at it strategically and you get ideas on how to approach your relationships in a different way to make that impact. And so what we'd like you to do, when you have some free time, you don't have enough time during this workshop, but on page 7, you have a blank sheet where you can actually produce your own influence map and put yourself in the middle, draw a circle, and then draw arrows with, like I mentioned, the thickness of the arrows symbolizing the amount of influence. And perhaps that might help you in terms of, when you're looking to produce more impact in whatever project you're working on.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Salima. Next up, we really want to take some time to dive in together. We've given you a couple of tools, very brief overview, and happy to take your questions as well at the end if you have any questions about those first two. But we want to take you on an experiential journey now. So grab your workbooks and we'll get started. We're going to be going through something called the teamwork test. And Salima's going to kick off this tool for us, but it's really an opportunity to really innovate and engage your team. Now, a lot of us know that our teams can make or break our work, right? Our impact. And so relationship building is really the key in a lot of our leadership. It's not always about us being at the front of the room. There's being of service to our team as another leadership style. And so we want this tool to be something accessible to you where you can actually use it to take a look at which areas your team is strong in and which areas perhaps you're not as strong in. So we'll go ahead and go through this now. We'd love you to grab a pen wherever you are and just go ahead and make note of how you score on each of these categories. It's of course subjective. You could have your entire team do this and then compare the way that people are thinking about it. So we'll take you through each of these categories and these questions.
Okay, so the first one is understanding of roles and your team profile. So when you're ranking, when you're going from 1 to 5, from poor to excellent, you're thinking about, are the roles clearly established in your team? Do people know exactly where to go for specific expertise or support?
Yeah, and just a note, if you don't have the workbook right now in front of you, you can still follow along with this exercise. So the categories, the ranking system for each of them, I'll just read them out loud for you and just make a note. 1 is extremely poor, 2 poor, 3 is fair, 4 is good, and 5 is excellent. So you can go ahead and write a number for each of these categories, no matter if you have the workbook or not.
Yep, and when you're done, the box to the right, just place the number in there because we'll be adding that up later.
So the second category within teamwork is purpose and objectives. So you really want everyone on the team to be aware of what the purpose is of the work that you're doing and to really be aligned around those objectives. So planning and actions are actually really connected with this piece. How are you and your team doing around purpose and objectives? Are you aware? Are you aligned? Is everyone else on board?
The third one is about trust, and this is a huge one. Do you feel like the team members are able to trust each other, that there's clear boundaries and everyone respects them? Do you feel like people are acting with integrity?
Yeah, are people being accountable for their mistakes? Are they keeping things in confidence that need to be kept in that way and really approaching situations with non-judgment? Are they making generous assumptions? Many of you may have heard, Brené Brown's The Anatomy of Trust. So really, if you're familiar with that, it really just takes a look at the breakdown of all the different categories of trust and an opportunity to take a look at each one. Think about how your team's doing there.
And then communication and relationships. How is the collaboration and the communication between the relationships in the team? Do people share information with each other? Active listening, do people actually listen to one another carefully and offer guidance and assistance?
Wonderful. So go ahead and rank that 1 to 5, 5 being the best and 1 being extremely poor. Number 5 is adaptability and flexibility. So what we know is that sometimes it's important to adapt and to be able to challenge the status quo in an organization in order to see progress. So how is your team doing? Are they adapting? Are they stuck in their ways? Are they flexible? Can they mold to any challenge?
And then if you turn the page over to page 9, number 6 is culture of compliance. So is there effective collaboration taking place between team members? Do they cooperate well? Is the team's full potential being exploited? Are all the team members' competencies being utilized most optimally?
Wonderful. Number 7 is leadership. So this is about the team leader. Does that leader offer an appropriate mix of support and direction? Do they provide the necessary flexibility in their leadership style? And also, do they offer frequent, open, and relevant communication with all of the team members?
Number 8 is process and group decision making. So do all team members contribute to decision making? Are the processes clear to all team members without seeming bureaucratic or unhelpful?
Number 9 is productivity. Team members need to be delivering the necessary quality and quantity of work. So how are you doing on that? How are you doing as a group on delivering on that? And how is each member doing individually? Right? So each member, the question is how much accountability are they really taking and responsibility for their contributions to the team? Just take a look.
And number 10 is morale and empowerment. Is there a sense of community and togetherness in the team? Is there positivity and happiness in the workplace? Do all the team members have the tools and resources that they need to carry out their roles properly? And do they feel empowered to the highest possible levels? So once you're done filling that out from 1 to 10, we'd like you to turn to the next page, to page 10, which is the key teamwork indicators. And what you can do is place this final score for each of those different indicators in this table and add them up. And the goal here is to look at where you scored, which indicators scored lower and higher. And what you'll do is turn to the next page, to page 11 in your workbooks, and identify where those different indicators go on this tree. So what you would do is place all the strengths, so the ones that scored higher, for example, 4 to 5, and place those indicators at the bottom of the tree where it says strengths. And then the ones that need some work, that there's potential for growth, you can place them on the top clouds where it says growth areas.
And if you don't have the workbook, the tree is basically just, the top part is for the growth areas and the bottom is for strengths. So you can go ahead and draw your own tree. This is a really nice visual to sometimes keep, to actually have printed out or posted in your office as a way to just be keeping track, and you can actually move things around. So as your team gets stronger in a different area, it can move, and as new challenges come up, they can be posted here on the tree. So you can kind of get creative with it, but it's an opportunity to have a visual reminder of what it is that you really want to work on as a team and where your gaps are.
Perfect. So our next exercise within this exercise is going to be doing some design thinking. Who here is familiar with design thinking? Okay. So design thinking, if you turn to page 12, you'll see the model there. You may have seen something similar to this in the past, where you see, the process of design thinking. This is a fairly innovative way to look at solving our teamwork problems. And we're just going to run through from empathize to implement. And so basically, just a brief introduction to design thinking is a future-oriented way of looking at problems. It's really about reframing problems and using human-centric ways. And it's extremely useful for tackling problems that are either ill-defined or unknown. And that happens a lot of times when we don't really know the root of a problem. And so what we want you to do is step in and be the entrepreneur or the intrapreneur and really get creative in terms of brainstorming solutions to these problems. And the first step is to empathize. So as you see here in the model, empathize, what it means to empathize is whenever you're solving a problem using design thinking, it's all about really looking at the human element. So your target audience, you're really getting under their skin. What do they value? What are they currently feeling like? Really trying to understand what they want. And then you go to the next step, which is defining the problem. And this really helps you bring clarity and focus. And then you go through an ideation phase, which is that creative brainstorm, which you'll see on the next page. And this is where you have the opportunity to think wide. And there's no rules here, so you get to have fun and sketch out solutions. And what separates design thinking from other empirical forms of thinking is that all ideas are welcome. So the key is actually to not think so hard, don't analyze too much, and just let your hands draw different solutions, as you'll see on the next page. And then we move to another step, which is prototype and testing. And in that phase, you're really trying to test that solution and get feedback. So there could be different phases of implementation where you're doing that. So that way, when you fully implement that solution, you've tested it, you've gotten feedback, it's refined, it's fine-tuned, and you know that it will work. So what we'd like you to do is turn to the next page. And we're just going to run through an example of this. So you know a bit of the theory now. What you'd like you to do is think about the growth areas. Think about the previous exercise where you identified some of the growth areas for whether it's your team challenges, in your organization, whatever the challenges are. For me, I can give an example. So I co-led a study with the World Bank last summer. And we were looking at ways to improve livelihoods for refugees using water-saving agriculture technologies, such as hydroponics. And for those of you who aren't familiar with hydroponics, it's a way of growing produce, such as leafy greens, tomatoes, all sorts of different fruits and vegetables using very little water and no soil, which is perfect for growing food in the desert. And we identified a lot of issues. For example, the refugees are experiencing food insecurity, there's water scarcity, It's hard for them to be employed oftentimes. They don't have access to land oftentimes. So we thought, if we implement hydroponics, we have to think about all these different challenges. And one of them was, our teamwork challenges where there's a lot of tension oftentimes in the refugee camps. When we went to Djibouti last summer, we saw in a camp there were Somalians, Eritreans, Ethiopians. And there was a lot of potential for this solution of hydroponics, but there was a lot of teamwork challenges within the camp. And some of those growth areas, as you see, are purpose and objectives, trust, communication, relationship breakdowns, morale and empowerment. And so what I did was I ideated by designing different solutions to solve those challenges. And as you see, the first in the upper left box, that's about improving the relationship with the host community. So you have the Lebanese flag and the Syrian flag, and perhaps a way to target, to help improve those relationships would be to foster a better relationship with the host community, with the local community. And then we have under that box, in the middle left box, bringing women together in a training program might be a great solution to empower a lot of the women that are currently home and not working, and bringing together the community. And so it was just really just sketching different solutions that could help empower the refugees and solve some of those teamwork challenges. So what we'd like you to do right now is take a few minutes. If you turn to page 14, the next page in your workbooks, and refer back to that table of the indicators and where you scored lower in the teamwork test. And you can write down the growth areas at the top of the page. And we'd like you to just, use simple stick figures and sketch solutions to your challenge.
Yeah, and this might seem like something that you would do in a classroom, and in fact it is, but the whole idea is to just get back to that childlike creative thinking state with design thinking, right? Because sometimes we think inside of a box, and this is encouraging you to actually step out and think differently about some of your challenges. So any idea goes. It could be a wild and crazy idea. What you want to do is draw and draw very recklessly, right? This is not an art class, right? So go ahead and we're going to give you 30 seconds approximately to sketch that first sketch. So think about an idea for one of your teamwork challenges and go ahead and make a sketch. Ten seconds. And pens down. Awesome. All right. Now grab one of your other growth areas and take a moment to think about what could you create for your team, for your clients, that would have that go differently.
Just let those ideas flow.
Few more seconds to finish up your sketch. All right. Grab one more of your growth areas, or perhaps come up with another idea about that same growth area that's really challenging you. What else could be done? What else could you create? Could be a program, could be an activity. What do you see?
Okay, so time is up. You can continue this exercise, after the workshop. This is really just to introduce you to this concept and this exercise. Who would like to share what they came up with or anything they learned during this process? Anyone? Anyone from the virtual audience?
So, unless we have... So, one of the challenges of a particular client group that I've been working with is adaptability and flexibility being a growth area. And I would not be surprised if many of us who are federal practitioners find that that can be a challenge area, given that the levels of bureaucracy, many times people don't feel empowered to work beyond the specific scope of something that they've been giving. So their flexibility over time can decrease because they haven't been given that space to work beyond that. So this is by no means an original idea, but I made a funny little sketch about having a time where the group comes together to ideate on their own and think about what else they could be doing, or hear about each other's projects, and maybe just simply hearing about what other people are working on, what other ideas people have, then it can improve flexibility.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, and one more thing to know about this ideation process with the teamwork test is that you can actually do this for each other's challenges. It's really effective to use this design thinking model to get outside of what you and your team may have already thought of. So you can even take a challenge to another department, you can take a challenge to another practitioner, you can get a group of practitioners in the room and have each other ideate on each other's challenges instead of on your own, right? So maybe I've been thinking the same old ideas for the last 10 years. I get in the room with an engineer, and they're going to have a whole lot of different ideas about what I could do to solve my challenges. So you can do this around teamwork. This design thinking model can be applied in other areas. So don't let it stop you here. And it's actually really fun to do in a group. Say I've got a group of, I've done it with my partner. They've ideated for my challenge. And then if you present it in front of a group, we just did this a few weeks ago at the World Bank at the Youth Summit, then the group can actually comment and give ideas about those ideas. So maybe I've just come up with all these ideas for Salima's challenge, and I present them to the group, and the group says, well, have you thought about this? Grab a Post-it, write down an idea, tack it on there. So what you're doing is you're crowdsourcing and really walking away with a lot more ideas for the challenges that you've been facing, and a lot of innovation. So this is a great tool to use with a team, not just on your own about your own challenges.
Mm-hmm. And just as Melinda mentioned, you can get as creative as you like. You can, you can use Play-Doh. You can bring pipe cleaners and popsicle sticks and really get creative when you're doing this. And it's great for like roundtables at a retreat or, at a group meeting. It works in all sorts of settings, and it really gets people creative, and it works pretty well.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun when we're not on a stage and when you've got all the materials. So definitely take advantage of this and see what it has for you in terms of creating new possibilities.
Okay, perfect. So this leads us to our last exercise, which is the Epic Impact Plan. And this is going to be one of the most important tools that you're going to walk away with today.
So the Epic Impact Plan is really to design projects around very impactful goals, right? And it's important to think about how our projects are started. So one of the things we wanted to just speak about really briefly is our motivation for doing the work that we do. Sometimes it's very easy to get disconnected to why am I working on this particular conflict, this particular project, this particular initiative. And so, we wanted to address this issue of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Who here sometimes feels like they're running something that's extrinsically motivated, that isn't really at the core of what they really want to be doing? Anyone? Okay. It's happened to me. Luckily, I do what I love now, right? But it hasn't always been like that. And sometimes there are projects that I don't feel connected to. So we hope that with this exercise, this will actually help people connect to the what for, the why, behind the projects and the initiatives that they're working on. So intrinsic is coming from inner fulfillment, right? Impact, giving back. Whereas if I'm extrinsically motivated, I may be influenced by external factors in the work that I'm doing. It's just something to keep in mind as we go through the Epic Impact Plan. So the goals of this process, this tool that you'll find on page 15 of the workbook, is really to map out what steps need to happen in order to accomplish your goals, right? To have a visual aid that you can work with, and to really clarify also what your resources are as you work through this process, and to create a timeline with specific goals, milestones, actions, and impacts, right? So I'll use a very personal example from my work with inner peace building so that you have a sense of how this can be applied. So this year, I was giving a workshop at a peace assembly for Rotary International. I was a peace fellow in their program, World Peace Fellowship. And so I tend to go every couple of years and give workshops and talk to a lot of other peace fellows about what's true in their work. Now, a peace fellow is someone who's a practitioner in peace building and who's been selected for this program. So there's over 1,000 of us now out there in the world, you know, doing our peace building work through different avenues. But across the board, what we have found is that these peace fellows who are in the field, they're out there doing humanitarian work, they're out there doing conflict resolution work, are really experiencing a lot of burnout and experiencing a lot of trauma, right? And that's something that we know can happen through a lot of different industries, not just in peace building, right? And so resilience is a really big issue. So we ran these workshops and we did some diagnostics, and we found that across the board people are dealing with this issue. And there isn't really training and coaching and curriculum there to support and creating a really resilient, sustainable career in the Peace Fellowship. So we created a working group and we decided to go and propose some curriculum. So that's the background. So what I have done is use this Epic Impact Plan tool to map out this project in peace building and resilience building. So, but I did it from my core leadership qualities. So I know that I fall very much in the educator quadrant, and some of my qualities are around really being empowering and supportive of others. And so I actually listed that as in the top quadrant, under the top thing here, core leadership quality. I put in my own core leadership qualities there. From that, I actually took a look at what's my intrinsic motivation. Why do I want to be involved in this project? What is this really about? So for me, it's really about supporting and empowering peace builders globally to lead resilient, impactful, and sustainable careers. Something I can really get behind and that's connected to my core leadership quality of empowering and supporting, right? So now that I have identified that, well, actually, I'll take a pause here because I'd love for you guys to go through this exercise with me. So take a minute. If you want to go back in the workbook and take a look at core leadership qualities, you will find a map on page 3 and some qualities listed in the quadrants on page 2. The qualities are also listed on page 3, so take a look and see what are some of the qualities that you may identify with on this map. Just take a moment to circle a few that really resonate with you. So I'll read some of them out in case you don't have the workbook. Mentor, visionary, charismatic, bold, courageous, purpose-driven, inspirational, grounded. Educator, empowering, encouraging, authentic, humble, integrity, team-focused, motivating, collaborative. The innovator, rational, knowledgeable, forward-thinking, intelligent, strategic, problem solver, proactive, steady. And finally, the coach, caring, open, people-oriented, accountable, considerate, adaptable, responsive, respectful. There are more words here, but those are a few. Now that you've got your core leadership qualities, choose one that you feel very motivated to be, really working from in your career. And go ahead and write that into the Epic Impact Plan under core leadership quality. That's going to be on page 15. And if you've done that, go ahead and take a moment to think about what is my intrinsic motivation for the work that I do. What really motivates me and why? Now remember, you can go back and work through this later, so for the interest of time, I'll continue to move forward. but you feel free to revisit this. So going back to my example, I created an impact project from that core quality and from that intrinsic motivation. So if you already have a project that you're working on that you feel passionate about, take a moment to work backwards from that project and think about what was the motivation for me being involved in that, or for creating that, and what was the core leadership quality that this brings out in me or that I can access as a leader in this project. So it doesn't have to always be for a new project. It can be something you're already working with.
And a good way to do this is to just ask why, find that root, because oftentimes we think this is our motivation, but when we keep asking ourselves that why or that what for, we dig to a deeper level.
Yes. So to give you an example of what the project itself is, in my case, the project is resilience coaching and training for Rotary World Peace Fellows. So take a minute to jot down whatever the project is, either something you're working on or an idea you have, something new. Now, one of the things that we want to create is really a very specific goal for this project. So Salima, do you want to share a little bit about specific goals?
Yeah, so specific goals. Actually, I'd like to hear from the audience. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to share what they think is a specific goal?
In your current job or just overall?
Just overall, a specific goal, what that means to you.
Well, I want to be good at my work and I want to be like a very compatible person with all the team members. But unfortunately, I don't think so that this kind of a quality is kind of a limited in most of the teams. It's kind of a really hard to create a compatibility. So it depends on the team members that how flexible they are or if they truly understand the underlying notion of the teamwork or something. So in my current position, I just feel that there's not so much compatibility in our team. And on my part, I'm really working hard to make it more collaborative. And that's my goal for the entire year, that if our team could be more collaborative. And if it's more collaborative, it will be more productive, of course.
Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, that's, specific goals are really about, what are practical ways we can set goals that are realistic, that are maybe more short, medium term, that are actually attainable, that don't seem too impossible to reach. They're still a bit ahead, but we can still, jump forward and reach them and make them happen. Because sometimes when we set goals that are, not realistic, we often get overwhelmed, and then it's just, we just sometimes get burnt out and they're not realistic, they don't happen. So that's what specific goals are about.
So one thing you might think about, for example, is how can I take this general goal that I have about creating more collaboration on my team and come up with a very specific project around it. So that project would be something that has an end goal that would be time-bound, realistic, something that might have a date to it that you could work back from. So do you have any particular ideas now that come to mind about a specific goal you could set for your team?
Well, I guess we can have more open communications. Certainly more open communication would be very helpful, and like individual communication. It depends on the size of the team. Currently my team is quite small, so I think we can have individual communication and individual feedback, and then we can discuss it like in a collaborative way with the other members. So, and we can come to common grounds that all can work together. It may take some time, but I think it's possible.
Wonderful. And what's your name?
Farah, I work at EIA. I'm relatively new here.
Thanks, Farah. So one of the things that Farah shared, which I think could be interesting, in order to create a very specific goal, and just to be really clear about what a specific goal looks like, you may actually want to think about a project that would create those results you're looking for, right? So one example could be that you create a company retreat for your company, or a departmental retreat, right? Perhaps a day of training, right? Where you're actually doing team building, collaborative exercises, something like that. And maybe that's culminating in on September 30th, right? That would be more of your specific goal, to create collaboration on my team through a company retreat by September 30th, 2018. that would be a specific goal. So just to give you a sense of how to take what you're talking about and put it into that format. It doesn't have to be that project, but that's an example. So in my case, the specific goal was to launch the Resilience Training and Support Program for 100+ Rotary World Peace Fellows each year, and to launch that by December 20th of 2018. So this is what we're working towards. You can hear that there's a number of people that we want to reach. There's a specific deadline that we've set in place for this process. So wonderful, and thank you for sharing. Perhaps the teamwork test will help. So moving forward, you'll see if you take a look at page 16, where my example is, I've listed a radical well-being plan and a solidarity squad. And I won't go into too much detail here, but I'd love for you to think about, in order for us to really succeed in our leadership, we actually have to be taking care of ourselves as leaders. You know, one of the things we noticed with the Peace Fellows is that there was a lot of burnout, right? And I know that that happens across the board. So this is a chance for you to take a look as leader. How are you doing on the well-being? And to actually develop a more radical plan for how you want to shift your well-being in service of showing up as the leader that you want to be. You know, what we've seen in peace building is a lot of people actually have to take a step back from their careers sometimes, or go into different lines of work because they're so exhausted. And this can be true across the board. So this is a chance for you to take a look at what you do daily, what you do weekly, and what you do monthly to really care for yourself so that you can show up powerfully in your work. And the Solidarity Squad is really a chance for you to identify a few people who are going to be key to this project's success. Now, they may be people within your organization, but they also may be people within your personal life who are really going to support you as leader. So take a minute to write down a few names. This you can keep, to yourself, but just think about who do you want to have support you on this project.
They could be mentors, they could be your family members, your friends, your colleagues, a fitness instructor, whatever it is that motivates you.
And if you're feeling that you don't know who these people are yet, you could put a role in there and then go find someone to fill it. It doesn't have to be someone who's already in your life. You say, gosh, I don't have a mentor yet, but I could really use that. This is a tool for you to help you identify that and go out and find that person. So once you have those names written down, take some time on your own to fill out your radical well-being plan. I highly recommend it. It's something we usually skip over as busy and motivated leaders, and it can really make the difference. Well-being is often in breakdown, and then we can't function, right? So it's something to consider. Now, we have our specific goals. We've got our plans laid. Now is the time to actually think about our milestones. So if you've got your end date to what you want to accomplish with your project, you're going to have several milestones along the way in order to get there. You want to identify those milestones and figure out what are the actions that you're going to need to take to get there. Now, if this is overwhelming to think about all the milestones and all the actions, you can actually break it down and just start with the action plan under Inspired Actions towards your first milestone. So you don't have to try going to think what you're going to have to be doing in November of this year. You can start with, great, my first milestone in my example here was to submit the final proposal and the budget to Rotary International by December 10th, 2017, which we did, right? And in order to do that, we needed to do a diagnostic at the Presidential Peace Conference to find out what people actually needed for this program. We needed to form a resilience working group, host bi-weekly meetings, create our terms of reference, develop our proposal, our costing structure, and we had to meet with key advocates, right? Now, there's an opportunity below on every milestone and inspired action. There's an opportunity to write about impacts. Now, why is this important? Sometimes we feel like we're just doing, and there's no actual impact to the work that we're doing at each step, or we don't know what that impact is. What's the positive impact of what we're implementing daily? So when you go ahead and identify the impacts of each set of inspired actions, it helps you kind of connect to your what for, that intrinsic motivation that sometimes we can feel lacking or our clients may be lacking. So go ahead, in this case, the impacts of this first phase, we're actually getting the organization on board to really support this kind of training, getting them enrolled, getting them to really care about this for their Peace Fellows. And we had a lot of supporters, huge show of support from within the organization. And the impact was that we actually created a working group of expert facilitators that can actually implement this. And that's a working group across different countries. So we've got facilitator and coach in Thailand, we've got one in Australia, we've got one in Spain, in the United States, we've got psychologists too. So this working group is a product of this project, and that's a real impact. So you'll see other examples here. Take a minute to just think about a few milestones on your way, and go ahead and write them down on page 15 under milestones. And then when you're taking time to continue this later, just be thinking about the inspired actions towards that first milestone. And go ahead and make sure you include the action and a by when. By when will I complete that action in service of reaching that milestone?
And you can expand this, or you can keep it narrow. However, it's really adaptable. It's a dynamic impact plan. So if you only want to fill out one of those columns, or you want to expand to have 4 or 5, that's okay as well.
And consider that this model can actually be used on any type of project, personal, professional. Some people will do an impact plan like this when they want to get healthy and lose weight, right? It's not just about what you're creating in your companies, and it's a great visual because you've got it on one page, so you could actually stick this up on a bulletin board right in front of you, and you can reference it at any time.
Okay, and the last component of this plan is really, really important. It's the evaluation part. So this is more of, the reflection when you look back and look at what worked, what didn't work. Did it meet your intrinsic motivation? What would you change about this plan? And this is an opportunity for you to fine-tune and go back and revise that plan to make it work for you.
Yeah, and one last piece that I'll say about this. Sometimes we create project plans, and then we get out the whip and start whipping ourselves to get there, get there, get there. And then when we don't, we criticize ourselves. Anybody else have this experience? Okay. Anybody use project planning as a way to beat up on yourself when you don't meet your goals? I have. So, I'm sharing this with you because we want this tool to actually be of service and to be a living, breathing, working document. This is a dynamic plan. This is not an opportunity for you to, grade yourself on how you're doing. So you can adjust things as you go on. You can, if you decide with your team or on your own that this is not the direction you want to go, you can adjust it, you can throw it out the window and make a new one, and you can have 3 or 4 of these going at any given time for different projects, right? It's just a tool, and it's how you relate to it and what you bring in your leadership to this process that's going to make it great. So the tool itself is just a piece of paper, but it's about how you utilize it.
Exactly. An example of that is, for me, I like to keep things digital. So for me, I'd like to actually type out a lot of this into a Google document where I can update it whenever I feel like it needs to be updated, and then I actually put into my calendar a lot of those goals and a lot of the things I need to do to take action. So there's lots of different ways you can use it.
Wonderful. So that brings us really, I'll leave this up here for a moment just so you can see what the goals are, but that really brings us to the end of this portion of kind of going through the workbook. Those are the 4 tools that we wanted to share with you today. And we would love to go ahead and open it up as well. It's just another visual that we'll leave up for those who may not have the workbook in front of them. We wanted to take a moment to really start fielding your questions from here in the room, from WebEx, and really just kind of open up the conversation around these tools.
Okay. These are questions from WebEx. One is, do you have a sample Epic Impact plan that you could share?
Yes.
And the second one is, someone else was asking, do you have an editable format for an impact plan that you could share?
Sure. So the sample, the one I was just talking about, is actually in the workbook. So I'm going to go ahead and put up the workbook link again for those of you who may not have downloaded it. What you'll notice, it's just here at the bottom, the Innovating Leadership Toolkit. And what you'll notice, it's on page 15, there's an empty Epic Impact Plan, and then on page 16 is my example that I shared today. So that's got all the different steps that I went through, and you can actually see a real example from my practice with inner peace building. So you can refer back to that whenever, if you're stumped on what a particular issue might be.
Yep, and regarding the editable version, if you want if you like a PDF that's editable to be able to make changes on your computer, what you can do is just send us an email, Salima@innovating.com or Melina@innerpeacebuilding.com, and we'll send you an editable version.
Yeah, thanks for that. What other questions?
I have a question about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So one of the things that resonated with me is that in different areas or different careers that you have, or even a different project right within that career that you're particularly working on, you could start off with a very intrinsic motivation, and then something happens and it becomes your motivation, you notice over time, is now more extrinsic. So how would you recommend using these tools to catch that and get back to an intrinsic motivation place?
Okay, so there's different ways of approaching that. I think that these tools are great to, if you're working alone and you want to do some reflection and you want to dig deeper, and like I mentioned earlier, asking yourself that why. However, I think that these tools are great, but I think it's also great to have other support. For example, whether you want to have a mentor or a coach or somebody that can really listen to your inner voice. What is it that you really want? I think for me, that's been really helpful to have someone reflect back my inner voice to me by having a coach by my side. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do that. Sometimes this is an issue around, a whole company-wide or department-wide issue as well. Right? Like a lot of times you'll have a whole group of employees who are kind of disempowered and unmotivated around the particular project or job, even though when they started it was really exciting, right? So sometimes it's not just an individual issue. And in those instances, there's a lot that can be done. I would recommend actually having a group process. So one of the things that we do is we facilitate, at organizations and teams and companies, actually having someone come in and take a look. You can use this toolkit. We have a training on it, for companies, but really looking at, okay, what are the gaps? Where are people disconnected? And the more work that you do, both individually with those team members and with the team as a group, the more that people are going to start accessing their core leadership qualities. The more that people are going to start seeing their intrinsic motivation and how it's connected. Because a lot of times it's there and people have forgotten about it. Maybe their well-being is off and they're totally burnt out and they're not able to remember their what for, right? So sometimes having a group process, a workshop, a training, a facilitation can, or even a team building process, right? Because a lot of times it's not fun to come into work anymore, right? And so having that jumpstart that process, I have several other tools that I use with my coaching clients around motivation and intrinsic processes that I use one-on-one as well. But there's a lot you can do, and this is just a beginning.
Thank you. I really appreciate that individual versus group answer for this issue. I think we have a few audience questions.
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I work as a volunteer mediator for my agency, and I see a lot of the breakdown of a lot of these leadership qualities, a breakdown of trust, a breakdown of communication that leads to the mediation. Right. And one of the things that we learned when we were certified as mediators was that it's very important to remain neutral throughout the process. So what I'm kind of struggling with, and maybe you have some advice about this, is how to use your model, your tool, in a mediation context. That's what I would really like to hear from you about, any advice you have on using these things in the context of a mediation?
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, I can only speak for myself, and I'm not a mediator, but I am a conflict transformation practitioner. And I've worked with a lot of specifically youth in conflict, but I think a lot of the tools I've also worked with government leaders, right? So the tools can actually be applicable across the board. Sometimes when you're dealing with a conflict, it's important to either have the groups, if it's a group against group conflict, important to have the groups go off and do some independent work within their group, or the individuals go off and do some of this independent work with support of the mediator or coach, and then come back together. You know, it specifically, if you're thinking about the teamwork test, that's really an opportunity for reflection and diagnostic, but it could be easy for people to point fingers and say, well, the teamwork's not working because that person, right? So it's important to use these tools to take a look, and the goal is to get the individuals involved or the groups involved to actually see where their own gaps are, instead of it being about pointing the finger at the other group. So sometimes separating them off and doing this tool one-on-one, or in, you know, I used to work with groups of, from Cyprus, of you know, Turkish and Greek Cypriots. And there were exercises where we decided to have people in their own communities and then come together. So, you know, I don't have the right answer for you. As a mediator, you're more qualified to decide where it's appropriate. But I think that you can feel free to adapt these tools to your particular circumstances and just get creative. You could even do one of the teamwork test ideation exercises, where the design thinking exercise for this challenge, and say, okay, here's the problem I'm facing. What are some solutions? Get some other mediators to ideate with you, to ideate on your challenges. You ideate on theirs, and together kind of see what you might be able to come up with. That's how I would approach it from my practitioner standpoint, but by no means the right way.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, these tools are just, you know, they're a base, they're a foundation, but you can really adapt them and use them however you want. So, for example, if it's not, you know, doing the design thinking on a sheet of paper, you could take a flip chart and do it in a group setting, like Milena mentioned. You can really take some of the questions, the prompts. We have a lot of great questions, especially in the first part, in the first exercise on core leadership qualities, and take a lot of that and adapt it to the setting. Mm-hmm. So this is really just a foundation to build upon.
Yeah, and what you're really going for is to get your clients, I would imagine, back into their essence, back into who they truly are, and not operating from self-defense, right? And so what we know is that when we're in our core leadership qualities, we're recognizing who we truly are. And sometimes we're in maybe what we might call our survival mechanism or our defense mechanism, and then we're not able to see those qualities in ourselves or in other people because we're triggered, right? So you could use the core leadership quality exercise to help draw that out, to help people really distinguish who they really are. They can write down their core leadership qualities and post them, and actually have a visual of who they actually are, not just what people have been criticizing them for being. It helps people get back to their being, I think, that exercise.
I really appreciate that response, because a lot of times the challenge in really getting to a constructive end or process in mediation is the self-reflection part, and having the individuals in the conflict do some self-analysis and self-assessment, and then getting back to their core and compassion for themselves and for their goals, so that they can then better recognize those things in someone else. I think we had another question.
Mine was a similar question regarding mediation and conflict coaching, so I think you've kind of addressed that. But in listening to your answer, I was also thinking that perhaps even the key teamwork indicators, it might be a way to use these as a way to ask questions about the conflict, because a lot of times as collateral duty mediators, we don't know the individuals or the dynamics that are going on until we're there and listening to them, and so that may be another area. I think possibly we could look at this and think of questions to ask to kind of help the parties reach a resolution to see what's really going on. But that was primarily my question, but I just wanted to add that to it.
Yeah, you can totally just adapt those questions in the teamwork test to mediation, to your situation, to your context. And another thing you can do is Actually, I wanted to just mention, if you have any questions about how to adapt our toolkit to your context, you can just send us an email. Our emails are up here. We're happy to answer your questions. We've worked with these tools in different ways in the past, and so we're happy to shoot ideas on how to adapt them to your situation.
Yeah, we can partner with you on that. If there's something you want to develop, just let us know, because we love people to take this and kind of fly with it in whatever way. I mean, you're all leaders, so in whatever way is going to really serve your community. The goal is for this to be of service in whatever way you see fit. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, ladies. I just had a question, but I think you guys already answered the question, so it's pretty much similar to what the two ladies in front actually asked. But just to add to that, on page 2, they have the high impact leadership quadrant there. And as a mediator, I think the one thing that I see that really would work for this is being that your presence is to be there and to be very neutral about what's going on. I think just putting yourself in that middle and that first high impact leader, that's you, looking out to what's really going on. I think that's a good way to really solve and walk through what's going on as you're actually going through that mediation process. So that really helps you to be very neutral, just having you there and going through what we call a convergent thinking process. So that's just about to that.
Yeah, and to your point, it's important that we don't need to favor one particular leadership style or another. We can put on different hats. The transformational leadership model is broad, and there are many other models that are great. So consider that as a mediator, you may be stepping into one hat in one moment with your clients, and then you may step over here in another moment. So feel free to move around between these roles as you see fit. This is just an opportunity to identify what a dynamic leadership profile within you looks like, and that includes many different roles. So thanks for that.
Is there anything in your overall approach that would be helpful to a dysfunctional team where, in the view of some team members, the resistance to imagination, to applying the sorts of tools you're talking about is at the top?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. So in terms of, a lot of these tools are very innovative. They're different. They can be seen as either highly innovative. They can also be seen as, it's another tool. Is this going to help solve our problem? And it comes down to really, like I mentioned earlier, is adapting them to your context. So if you're dealing with resistance, I think it's really about taking a step back and being able to relate to your audience and figuring out a way that can work. And like I said, we're happy to answer specific questions like that if you send us an email. And it's really about, finding a way that works, that people are willing to accept or work with. And it may not be through using a workbook like this or some of these actual, sheets of paper. It may be adapting it in a group meeting using, a whiteboard and finding a way to relate. And it takes that step back to be able to, like we do in design thinking, empathize with your audience and find a way that would actually work. I think actually design thinking is a great tool to use in that process of how to deal with that resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what came to me in addition is really taking a look at where the resistance is coming from and working on the group dynamic in order to kind of soften that group before jumping into this. So if you were to bring in facilitators to actually work with that group, what we might do as facilitators is spend some time with the group, getting to know them, diagnosing what's going on, and then identify, these are 4 tools, but we have a much bigger toolbox, as coaches and facilitators. And so, I can't say which tool I would maybe use first with your particular team until I know them. But the great thing about this is that you can adapt these tools, but there's also a lot of other tools. So if you wanted to do a process with your group, we would sit down and really take a look at, what are the complaints? What is the resistance? What's that about? And what do we want to actually generate from that? And which tools would be appropriate in that setting? right?
Yeah, so like she said, it was, it involves doing an assessment, like a diagnostic, in order to maybe, say that maybe there's some team building exercises that's needed before we step into these tools. And so it's specific to each context, and we're here to support you on that if you have any questions.
So while I give everyone a moment to see if we have any last questions from online, I wanted to share that if anyone was going to be seeking credit for today's presentation, the code word is going to be ideation. So ideation will be the code word. Do we have any final questions? One more. Here we go.
Sorry, I just have a comment. Would it be okay, so we're looking at the EPIC impact plan, and for the gentleman's question up front, would it be okay to say to really use the intrinsic motivation or maybe the extrinsic motivation to start working on the destabilized team, like find out, as government employees, we're either there because we love our jobs or because we love our pay or we love our boss or we get time off or telework. So I think really going into the first step of the EPIC impact plan will really help you know more about your employee to figure out what their motivation is at just working for you. So pretty much you find out if time off is what they want, or you find out if just having that 1 day flex hour is what they really need to just come back refreshed and really get into the actual vision of what you're doing. So would it be okay to use that as a core baseline for him to start, working with an employee? So just a suggestion. So I think the EPIC plan would be a good baseline.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And yeah, just to build up on an example is, if someone's intrinsic motivation, maybe it's like, okay, I like this job because I get to telework, or I get, 1 day off a week. And then you have to keep asking that why, because maybe it's not about just the teleworking. Maybe it's because they're working on something, their side project that they're really passionate about, and trying to figure out what is it. And it's asking that what for and that why, as we mentioned throughout the workshop.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to take a moment to thank our lovely speakers today. I think we heard a lot of specific and manageable and, most importantly, flexible tools that can be applied to many different challenges. I specifically really like the idea that just want to emphasize, because it was mentioned a couple times, of trying this on someone else's challenges and having them try it on yours. And what I really like about that, it's a sort of two birds with one stone, in that you'll get more creative new ideas for your challenges while at the same time building rapport with someone else. So that was just one takeaway that I had, and I'm sure there were many more. And I want to take another quick moment to thank everyone from the DOE and FEMA teams that helped put this together. And once again, thank you, Milena and Salima. This was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to give a special shout out to our very engaged audience. Thank you all for participating, and those of you who participated through WebEx. We'd love to see your work and support you on how to implement this. So just let us know how it's going, and if you have feedback for us, we're very open to it. And thanks for being here. And thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.